Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we are going to be looking at the world of social psychology.
Yeah.
We're going to be cracking open a classic textbook called Introduction to Social Psychology. So think of this as a crash course.
It is a good one, too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
it's a classic for a reason.
In how we humans tick, like how we think about each other, how we influence each other, and how we form connections.
And challenge some common assumptions that we all have about why we do what we do and how other people behave as well.
Okay, so let's jump right into one of the biggest questions that I think has sparked so much debate over the years.
Yeah.
And that's, are humans truly capable of being selfless? Or are we all ultimately driven by self-interest?
Yeah, such a great question. And the book uses this really captivating story to illustrate this point. Back in 1996, there was this gorilla named Binti Wa who became a national hero when she rescued this 3-year-old boy who had fallen into her enclosure at the zoo.
Wow.
And she picked him up and cradled him and brought him to the zookeepers. It was amazing.
That's incredible. It sounds like a genuine act of compassion,
Right.
right? Like she was protecting this child.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people looked at that and said, see, animals can be altruistic. They can
Right.
show empathy. And it sparked this whole debate about, the nature of altruism.
I can see where the debate comes in, though, because
Yeah.
how do we really know what's going on in an animal's mind, right?
Exactly. How are we interpreting these actions through a human lens, right?
Yeah.
And is that accurate?
Yeah.
And so around the same time, you had the socialite, Sandy Hill Pittman. She was scaling Mount Everest and kind of pushing her own limits, even at great risk to her own safety. And, it kind of begs the question of, was that a selfish act?
Right.
Was that, something that was, for her own personal gain and glory, even at the expense of others?
Right. So we've got these two contrasting examples, right? We have this seemingly selfless act of heroism from Binti Tuya the gorilla.
Right.
And on the other hand, this pursuit of personal achievement that some might view as more self-centered. And it really makes you wonder, what drives us as humans? Is it nature?
Yeah.
Is it nurture? Is it our genes, our environment, or maybe a bit of both?
It's the classic nature versus nurture debate, right? And the textbook really dives into this by exploring the sociocultural perspective,
Boy.
which emphasizes how the norms and values of the society we live in can shape our thoughts and our actions.
Right. And I think that makes a lot of sense if you think about different cultures and how they approach things like personal space
Yes.
or expressing emotions.
Totally.
It could be vastly different.
Yeah. You go to different countries, and what's considered polite in one country is considered rude in another. And it's all about just what you've learned from the people around you.
Right.
But even within a single culture, we still see so much variation in behavior, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that's where the idea of goals comes in. One of the core principles of social psychology is that our behavior is goal-oriented. We interact with others to achieve something, whether it's as simple as getting a cup of coffee
Right.
or as complex as building a career.
So you're saying that even those seemingly random interactions we have throughout the day are actually driven by some kind of underlying goal.
Totally. Our brains are constantly strategizing, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Wow, so it's like we're all just playing this big game of social chess all the time.
In a way, yes. And these goals can be short-term, like wanting to impress someone at a party, or long-term, like building a lasting relationship.
Right.
And the book actually cites a study that found that men were far more likely to respond to any opening line from a woman than women were to respond to a man's opening line.
That's
Like
interesting.
across the board, pretty much any opening line a woman gave,
Wow.
a man would respond to, whereas women are a lot more selective.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like even in those very initial stages of attraction, there are already these differences in how men and women are approaching that goal of connecting with someone.
Right, and I think it speaks to kind of these underlying evolutionary goals
Right.
as well that we've inherited from, our ancestors and that are still driving our behavior today.
Right. I imagine the situation plays a huge role too, though, right?
No,
Like
absolutely.
a cheesy pickup line might work at a bar, but probably not so much at a library.
Totally. And that brings us to the second core principle that's emphasized in the book, which is that our behavior is this constant interplay between the person and the situation.
Okay.
So our inner traits and motivations collide with these external forces in our environment, and it creates this complex dance of social interaction.
So it's not just who we are on the inside, but also the context that we're in that shapes how we act.
Yeah, it's this constant interaction.
Okay. Do you have any examples from the book that really bring this principle to life?
Well, the book uses the chilling example of Charles Manson and his followers.
Right.
Manson was, a charismatic but deeply troubled individual, and he was able to exploit the kind of countercultural norms of the 1960s to manipulate his followers into committing horrific acts.
That's a really disturbing example.
Right.
It definitely highlights how powerful those situational influences can be, especially when you combine them with someone who knows how to kind of exploit them.
For sure.
It makes you wonder, how do we even begin to make sense of this complex social world if our behavior is constantly being shaped by so many factors?
It's a great question, and this is where mental representations come into play.
Okay.
So the book explains how our brains use these mental shortcuts like exemplars, schemas, and scripts to simplify the overwhelming amount of social information that we encounter every day.
So it's like our minds are creating these mental files to categorize people and situations so we don't have to process every detail from scratch
Yeah.
every time we encounter something new.
Exactly. It's all about efficiency for our brains.
Right.
So, for example, if you meet someone who reminds you of a celebrity or a historical figure, you might automatically associate certain traits with them based on your existing mental representation of that person.
Okay. I can see how that would be useful, but also potentially problematic.
Oh, totally.
What if our mental representations are based on inaccurate information or stereotypes?
That's the danger, right? And that's what the book highlights, is that this kind of efficient but sometimes flawed thinking can lead to biases,
Right.
which can have real-world consequences.
Okay, so our brains are wired to take shortcuts,
Yes, they are cognitive misers.
but those shortcuts can sometimes lead us astray.
Absolutely.
What are some of the specific biases that the book explores, and how can we become more aware of them in our own lives?
Well, one common bias is the actor-observer difference, where we tend to attribute our own actions to the situation, but explain other people's actions by their personality.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. Like if I'm late for a meeting, it's because of traffic.
Right.
But if someone else is late, it's because they're irresponsible.
Exactly. We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, but
Yeah.
hold other people to a different standard. It's fascinating.
It really is.
And then the book also explores the representativeness heuristic, where we judge people based on how closely they fit a typical example.
So like assuming that someone wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase must be a lawyer?
Exactly. Or that somebody who's, wearing tie-dye and Birkenstocks must be a hippie.
Right.
Right? We make these snap judgments based on these very superficial cues.
So while these mental shortcuts can be helpful in some situations, they can also lead to some pretty inaccurate judgments and maybe even missed opportunities.
For sure.
It really makes you wonder how much control we really have over our perceptions and judgments.
Right. Are we really in control?
If our brains are constantly trying to simplify things and make sense of the world, but sometimes those attempts at simplification can backfire.
Yeah. It's almost like we're walking around with these pre-programmed filters that shape how we see the world, but then the book dives into this concept called the power of the situation, and it really flips the script.
Right. It challenges this notion that our personalities are what dictate our actions all the time.
Yeah.
It says sometimes the environment that we're in can be so powerful that it overrides those internal traits. Okay, so do you have an example of that? Because it's hard for me to imagine my personality taking a backseat to the environment,
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how your behavior changes depending on where you are? Like you might be loud and outgoing with your friends,
Yeah.
but then really reserved and polite in a professional setting?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like we adapt to the social norms of different situations. But what about those more serious situations where our morals are at stake? Can the environment really influence those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the book actually cites this really interesting study about supermarket employee theft. And what they found was that theft was more often linked to the company's policies and the workplace culture than to the employee's inherent honesty.
That's really surprising. I would have assumed that someone who steals is just, dishonest by nature.
Right.
But this suggests that even seemingly good people can make bad choices if the situation kind of pushes them in that direction.
Absolutely. And it's not just about these external pressures either. Another study found that even something as simple as being mentally tired can impact our behavior.
Really?
Yeah. So people who are under cognitive load, like they were trying to remember a long number or something,
Okay.
were more likely to make unintentional sexist remarks.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It really highlights how vulnerable we are to these situational influences, even when we have good intentions.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how much of our behavior is truly under our conscious control?
It's a great question, and one that social psychologists are still trying to figure out. But one thing's for sure is that we are constantly being influenced by the people around us.
Right.
And the book really dives into three forms of social influence:
Okay.
conformity, compliance, and obedience.
Okay, break those down for me because they all sound a bit similar.
Okay, so let's start with conformity. That's the tendency to go along with the crowd even if we disagree, and the classic example of this is the Asch conformity experiment, where participants were shown lines of different lengths and asked to match them up. The task was really simple.
Okay.
But when Confederates in the group intentionally gave the wrong answer, a lot of the participants conformed and doubted their own perception.
It's like when you're in a meeting and everyone agrees on something, even though you have doubts,
Right.
but you just go along with it to avoid rocking the boat.
Exactly. It shows the power of social pressure to make us question our own judgments.
Wow.
Now, compliance is a bit different. It involves agreeing to a request even if you're not thrilled about it.
Like when a friend asks you to help them move and you say yes, even though you'd rather be doing anything else.
Precisely. We comply for various reasons, maybe to avoid conflict or to gain social approval, or simply because the request seems reasonable at the time.
Right.
And then there's obedience, which involves following orders from an authority figure, even if those orders conflict with your own morals. And the Milgram obedience experiment is a chilling example of this, where participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to a learner whenever they made a mistake.
Right.
And despite, their obvious distress, a lot of the participants obeyed the experimenter's commands to continue, even when the shocks supposedly reached dangerous levels.
That experiment is always so disturbing to think about. It shows how easily we can succumb to authority, even if it means causing harm to others. It makes you realize that anyone is capable of unthinkable acts under the right or wrong circumstances.
It's a sobering reminder of the power of the situation. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something a little more positive: relationships.
Okay, I'm ready for a lighter topic.
Right.
Why do we form these bonds with others, and what are the different ways that we interact within those relationships?
Well, the book explores kind of the evolutionary benefits of social connection, things like social support and access to resources. But it also dives into the different models of social exchange, which basically describe these unwritten rules that govern how we give and receive within relationships.
So are you saying that there are different, currencies in relationships? Like sometimes it's about emotional support, and other times it's about practical help or even material goods.
Exactly. One model is communal sharing, which is really common in families or close friendships. It's about giving without expecting an immediate return, based on a sense of shared needs and trust.
That makes sense. You don't really keep track of every favor you do for your family members,
Yeah.
right? But how does that compare to other types of relationships, like with colleagues or acquaintances?
Yeah, in those situations, you might see more of an authority ranking model where there's like a clear hierarchy,
Okay.
or an equality matching model where people are really striving to maintain balance and reciprocity.
Right.
And then there's market pricing, which is more transactional, like with a shopkeeper, you pay for the goods or services that you receive.
It's fascinating how these different models kind of play out in our lives. It's like we're constantly switching between these unspoken rules depending on who we're interacting with and what we're trying to achieve within that relationship.
And these dynamics can even vary across cultures. Research has shown that compared to American students, Chinese students are more likely to favor equality matching in friendships, where rewards are divided equally regardless of individual contribution.
That's a great example of how cultural norms can influence our expectations within relationships. It's a reminder that there's no one right way to connect with others.
And when it comes to romantic relationships, the book goes beyond this simple notion of love and dives into these different components that contribute to lasting bonds.
Oh, this is where it gets juicy.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key ingredients for a successful romantic relationship according to the book?
Well, the book highlights the importance of passion, intimacy, and commitment.
Okay.
Passion is that initial spark of attraction and excitement. Intimacy involves emotional closeness and vulnerability. And commitment is the decision to stay together even when things get tough.
So it's not just about finding someone you're attracted to, but also building a foundation of trust and understanding and a willingness to work through challenges together.
Exactly. And the book explores how these components interact in different relationship types, from casual dating to long-term partnerships. And it also delves into the role of attachment styles, which are basically these patterns of relating to others that we develop early in life.
Attachment styles. I've heard of those before, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Can you refresh my memory?
Sure. The book describes three main attachment styles: secure, anxious, ambivalent, and avoidant.
Right.
People with a secure attachment style tend to feel really comfortable with intimacy and interdependence,
Yeah.
while those with an anxious, ambivalent style crave closeness, but they also worry about being abandoned.
Right.
And then those with an avoidant style often distance themselves from others to kind of protect themselves from getting hurt.
It's amazing how these early experiences can shape our adult relationships. Makes you wonder how much of our love life is predetermined by those early patterns.
It's a fascinating area of research, and the book goes into how these patterns can influence how we give and receive support within relationships.
Speaking of support, I've noticed that men and women often seem to express care and support in different ways. Is there any truth to that, or am I just buying into stereotypes?
You're actually onto something. Research suggests that women tend to be more emotionally supportive, offering empathy and a listening ear,
Uh-huh.
while men may prioritize problem solving or offering practical help.
So it's not that one way is better than the other, but rather that men and women might have different love languages, so to speak.
Exactly. And these differences are likely rooted in a combination of biological and social factors, highlighting that ongoing interplay of nature and nurture that we've been talking about.
This deep dive is making me rethink so much about how I interact with others. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing all these hidden motivations and influences that I never even considered before.
Yeah, it really is. And it makes you think about all those different forces at play, right? And speaking of influence, the book dedicates a whole chapter to the psychology of groups. And it just made me realize how much of our lives are spent navigating those group dynamics,
Yeah,
whether for family or our workplace or even just our circle of friends.
absolutely. I mean, we're constantly interacting within groups, but what actually makes a group more than just a collection of individuals?
Right.
Well, the book highlights some key characteristics like interdependence, meaning that group members rely on each other to achieve shared goals.
Okay.
And then there's this sense of group identity where members feel like they belong
Right.
and that they have a shared purpose.
So it's not just about being in the same place at the same time. There's this deeper level of connection and
Yeah.
purpose that kind of binds the group together. Totally. And don't forget about structure, too, because groups often have roles and norms and hierarchies
Yeah.
that influence how members interact and make decisions. So think about like a sports team.
Yep.
You've got captains and players with different positions and a coach who sets the strategy.
Right. It's like a well-oiled machine, or at least that's the goal.
Right.
But let's be honest, not all groups function smoothly.
Oh, for sure.
We've all been part of those dysfunctional teams where nothing seems to get done.
Absolutely. And that's where the concept of social loafing comes in.
Okay.
So the book explains that individuals often put in less effort when they're working in a group compared to when they're working alone. It's that someone else will take care of it mentality.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
Right.
It's like group projects in school where one person ends up doing all the work
Totally.
while everyone else just coasts along.
But the good news is the book also explores factors that can boost group productivity.
Okay.
Things like setting clear goals, having effective leadership, and fostering a sense of accountability among members.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If everyone feels like they have a stake in the outcome
Right.
and that their contributions really matter, they're more likely to pull their weight.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what about group decision making? Is it true that two heads are better than one?
Well, it depends. The book acknowledges that groups can make better decisions than individuals because they bring diverse perspectives and knowledge to the table.
Okay.
But there's also this risk of groupthink.
Groupthink, that sounds a bit ominous.
Yeah, it's this phenomenon where the pressure for conformity within a group leads to poor decision making.
Okay.
So essentially, members suppress their doubts or dissenting opinions just to maintain harmony.
Right.
And that can result in overlooking critical information or making really risky choices.
It's like that saying, don't rock the boat, even if the boat is headed for a waterfall.
Exactly. But the book also emphasizes the value of diversity within groups. When you have people with different backgrounds and experiences and perspectives, it can lead to more creative and well-rounded solutions.
So healthy conflict can actually be productive.
Absolutely.
It's not about agreeing with each other all the time,
Right.
but about challenging each other's ideas and working together to kind of find the best path forward.
You got it. And speaking of navigating those complex group dynamics, The book revisits the story of Margaret Thatcher that we talked about earlier.
Oh, right.
Remember, she faced those significant challenges as a woman entering this male-dominated world of British politics.
Right. She was often underestimated and dismissed by her male counterparts.
Totally.
But she defied the odds and became the first female prime minister of the UK.
It's a pretty incredible story of resilience and leadership.
It is. And the book highlights how Thatcher strategically used her outsider status to her advantage.
Okay.
Presenting her views as both consistent with traditional values,
Okay.
but also offering a fresh perspective.
So she kind of appealed to different factions within her party.
Right. Finding common ground while also standing out from the crowd. It sounds like a very delicate balancing act.
It was, and the book dives into how her leadership style, which initially proved really successful, eventually contributed to her downfall.
Oh, wow.
She became known for this unwavering stance and her resistance to compromise, and that ultimately alienated some of her supporters.
It's a good reminder that even the most effective leaders need to adapt to changing circumstances and maintain some flexibility in their approach.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, this deep dive has been a roller coaster of insights.
It has.
It's fascinating and sometimes a little unsettling to realize just how many factors influence our social behavior.
It really is. It's a journey of self-discovery for sure, and we've really only just scratched the surface here. The world of social psychology offers just endless opportunities for exploration. It's about understanding the forces that shape us as individuals and as members of groups.
Yeah, I feel like I'm seeing the world with new eyes, like noticing all these subtle cues and influences that were always there, but somehow invisible to me before.
That's the beauty of it. And remember, this understanding isn't just about gaining knowledge. It's about empowering yourself to navigate the social world with greater awareness and intention.
Exactly. And if social behavior is so strongly shaped by the situation, as the book suggests, it makes you wonder, how much control do we really have over our own actions?
Right.
And how can we use this knowledge to make more conscious choices that align with our values and goals?
Such two questions.
These are questions we'll leave you to ponder, and until next time, fellow deep divers, keep exploring.